Hello and welcome back to Star Citizen, in my series where I talk about ships and discuss a couple of their features to one of the more interesting cases in recent memory, which is the Anvil Hurricane. Let's take a look at it from outside. We've already seen it during the expo recently. Maybe we can zoom out a little bit. Alright. It's a pretty beautiful ship. It has a very unique way of getting in there where the seats are extended towards the downside of the ship, and you don't enter via a ladder or something. Just the seat comes down. You just sit down there, and then the seat just moves back up into the ship. So it's already pretty interesting at that. But even more interesting about the ship is the fact what sort of armament it has. It has a frame of a fighter, probably one of the bigger fighters, but in that frame you have two size 4 guns that you can mount that are pilot controlled, and in addition to that it has a turret on top of the ship that has 4 size 3 guns, which is a bit insane. I mean, that's basically the exact same firepower that a freelancer has in total, just never mind that the ship also has 2 size 4 pilot controlled weapons, which by themselves are already similarly powerful as 4 size 3 guns. So the ship seems pretty exciting, right? The only problem that we have to deal with is what's the intended role for this ship, really? Because that's kind of the main issue that this ship has. You know, what are you supposed to do with this? Because on first glance you might think, okay, it's a slightly heavier fighter with a lot more firepower. I see where this is going. You have this fighter that kind of has enough firepower to quickly take down other fighter craft, is a little bit bad armored, shielded, and, you know, it can just linger on the edges of the fight. It's probably not maneuverable enough to just be in the thick of it and maneuvering, but you'll just want to have it as a heavy fighter craft that just draws the line somewhere and obliterates everything in its path. You know, kind of what I would call the mech warrior inspired heavy role, where just by your mere presence you just dictate where the battle line is, and then just the rest just kind of has to arrange themselves around you. I think this ship is not very well suited for that, and the main reason for that is it doesn't have the durability that you would need to have in that role, because it's still only a fighter. While it's also pretty compact, it is a little bit less maneuverable than other fighter craft. And more importantly, it only has 2 shield generators, 2 size 1 shield generators to be more accurate. And with 2 size 1 shield generators, but in a less mobile frame, you're pretty vulnerable, especially considering that you have effectively 2 people in here in an ideal scenario. So that can't be it, right? And even if armor at some point comes into the game, I doubt it's going to be armored enough to just fulfill that role. So what else would there what else could you do as a role for this fighter craft? I looked a little bit into, you know, just our IRL military aviation, and I think the closest resemblance to the ship, in my opinion, appears to be the A-10 Thunderbolt 2, probably much more well known as the Thawk or Warthog, which is not there to deal with other fighter craft, but is there for other elements of your strike force to be a close air support fighter craft, as a CAS, or close air support, as I just said, which basically the role is to take out targets on the ground that are not quite as maneuverable as fighter craft, but probably too well armored for just other fighter planes, and probably too well armored for your infantry as well. So you just call in one of those guys with an overwhelming amount of firepower in an airframe that the ground target probably might not be able to hit, and then you just obliterate that, and then you just move away and move on to the next target. While we do have one mission in the alpha right now that basically is pretty similar to that, and it's the bunker mission that I think at some point I also did. But just in case you haven't seen it, you basically get tasked to remove criminals from a bunker on the planet Hurston, and the bunker is protected by an air defense turret which has recently been beefed up, and taking out those turrets is pretty difficult, even if you have a ship with decent shields and firepower. But in this ship, it's actually much more doable, just because you have an overwhelming amount of firepower, and so that would be like one role where the ship is pretty good at, but it's like but currently we just have this one mission that's simulating that. In addition, because you have two people on board, ideally here, you'll also have 2 people to liberate the bunker, which currently is pretty good because the AI right now likes to use swarm tactics. And when you have to reload, you might be in a bit of trouble if enough enemies are still alive. So bringing in a buddy is always helpful, so that someone's got your back when you have to reload. So that's the one mission where the ship is really excellent at. What we also found out the ship is pretty good at is dealing with ships that are at least medium in size. Like Cutlass is barely good enough because it doesn't have too much shield power and armor and just gets killed rather quickly, but it's probably still a little bit too maneuverable. But everything that's bigger than that, you have a pretty decent shot at hitting it, and while you're still pretty small and can maneuver a little bit, you'll probably not get hit too much in turn, and your firepower is just overwhelming to just obliterate the target. Speaking of firepower, I outfitted this ship. I kept the guns on the turret, which are just ballistic cannons, and then on the pilot-controlled weapons, the ship comes by default with gimbal size 3 scatter guns, which appears a really weird choice to me, especially if you think the ship is supposed to take care of other fighter craft, because with those guns you need to go in really close, because you know they have a really short effective range, so you just basically need to be knife fighting, and the ship is not very well equipped to be knife fighting anyone. So I just replaced those with fixed size 4 Gatling guns. I think the ship was going to be especially glorious when you also add Gatling guns to the turret, because then you just have, you know, Gatling Fire Supreme. Oh, giving me enemy, thank you. That's a Cutlass, alright.
Weapons online. Okay. Weapons offline. Weapons online.
As you can see, even with fixed guns and their issues, you can still hit Cutlass pretty well, and it goes down pretty quickly. You don't want to fight the Buccaneers. There's really no point in fighting those Buccaneers. If you really have to, the ship also has a bunch of missiles that you can use to obliterate them, and I'm just going to demonstrate that here because I would like to fight the Valkyrie to show that it's still okay against those. Because with your fixed guns you have issues just shooting the Buccaneer, even if it's coming right for you. Come on. Still alive. God dang. Well, that's all the missiles just used for one guy, but now we can deal with the Valkyrie just by ourselves. The ship is still able to deal with that, especially if you have a gunner that can provide additional firepower, but just with the pilot-controlled weapons, if you put more shield power forward, so you have some protection while engaging the craft, then just boom already. Thank you. Don't really want to slow down here.
Forward hit. Shields.
Should be almost down. Got them. Alright. I think I have a 10k mission I can at least fly to. I've also been able to kill caterpillars with it. I haven't run into a hammerhead, but I think it's not a particularly well-suited enemy for that if you don't have a gunner with you. If you have a gunner with you, it could be really tense and interesting, and you're probably gonna win that fight. Just with the pilot-controlled weapons, I kinda doubt it. But as you can see, the firepower is still enough, although you have to go with ballistic weapons, because in a similar problem that we discussed last time with the Hawk, the ship also has huge energy issues because it has way too much gun for a single size 1 power plant, which I alleviated here by just using ballistic weapons which don't require much power, so that I could install some better but more power hungry shields for some extra protection. But you really can't use any other weapons here than just a purely ballistic loadout. The power plant is not going to be able to handle it. And but you can take out ships pretty well. I mean, bigger ships. You know, they don't want to engage with buccaneers and the like, because it's just hitting them with fixed guns is just an exercise in frustration. And as you can see, they can eat up to 4 missiles. In some cases, I've managed to take them out with 2. But in the extreme cases, you need to use all your 4 missiles to just deal with that one guy. So, but if you know you have a mission where you don't really need to deal with buccaneers, because here in the 8K and 10K assassination bounty assignments, not assassinations, you only have to deal with targets that are at least cutlass in size as your main bounty target. While they might have an escort of smaller ships, you can just kill your target and then just leave. I just didn't want to just leave that buccaneer there, because dealing with a Valkyrie while you also have a buccaneer on your ass is painful. So I didn't want to do that. But as you can see, it's still good enough, and it has interesting options for roles in the future that not too many other ships are able to handle quite as well, which makes the ship pretty interesting. Still, I think the ship wouldn't suddenly become overpowered if it would gain, you know, another shield generator like the Saber has, or even another power plant, so you have a little more options in regards to weapons. I think if CIG added that, then we would have a really interesting ship that would be worthwhile to use with 2 people, and it can perform some very specific roles, but it can perform these roles pretty well. So I think the ship has potential, but it needs a few more tweaks, because right now it still has too much issues. The turrets being difficult to use against fightercraft being one, so you can't use it in what maybe was intentioned to be the role. CIG has done very diverse statements on that at some point it was said that, yeah, you could use it as fightercraft cover, which I don't really see, but it has overwhelming firepower, and as such it's capable of dealing with bigger ships better than small fightercraft do. So it probably can find its niche there, and it's a pretty interesting vessel for those cases when you just have a buddy and want to play with that buddy. And here, you know, it's a bit risky because you only have small shields, so your pilot needs to be, you know, very well aware of the limitations of the ship, but it's pretty fun, as I found out. And yeah, that's kind of about it about the ship. It could be pretty fun, could be pretty interesting long term for very specialized missions and targets and objectives, and with the new ground combat mode Theaters of War that they demonstrated at last CitizenCon, I think it might also find a really interesting niche there as kind of a fighter craft that, if you have local air superiority, you can just use to obliterate people in ground vehicles, maybe turrets and all that stuff. So I think it's gonna find its niche there. It should still be tweaked a little so that it can also just not horribly die against other fighter craft, maybe. I think a balance could be found there that would not make it overpowered against fighter craft, but still more viable in its intended roles. So it's a pretty neat ship. It's way too expensive for what it does, you know. If you were thinking about getting one, the price is about $200, which, you know, is still cheaper than the Saber, but is still pretty insane. It makes it more expensive than ships like the Hornet, for instance, and puts it in a similar price range as the Constellation Andromeda, which, you know, has its own issues, but at least you can use it for more stuff than just pure combat, you know. So I think at that price point you should, if you're not, if you don't want to invest hundreds or thousands of dollars into the game, then you probably want to invest in something that you can just use for as much content as possible, and not just have a very specialized close air support vehicle that is like good at one mission and that you can make do in some other scenarios. For that, it's a little bit too expensive, I feel. Alright, let's see what kind of target we get here. If we get a hammerhead, I'm just gonna peace out. I really don't want to deal with that. It's just gonna rip us apart. I mean, I guess we could try. If I die IRL, then we know for sure. But if we don't get that, we should be able to deal with it.
Okay.
And Andromeda, alright. Okay, we should be able to deal with that.
Okay. Okay.
Come on. Ah. They're sitting way too many different components with the Gatling gun, because Gatling guns, as I mentioned previously, but I'm just gonna reiterate that here, they have a very small cone of fire, so they don't hit precisely what you're aiming at, but something slightly around that on average. But still can take care of that. Cutlass and a Valkyrie, alright? Sounds like interesting targets to just take out for demonstration purposes. Come on.
Shields. Target destroyed.
Alright. Now another tangle with a Valkyrie. Alright.
Target hit. Shields.
Don't lie to me, the shield is not full, shield is at 44%. Is that good? I don't particularly like it when they just slow down, because, you know, we have to slow down too to stay on that tail, and slowing down is not great. Because we get hit way too much. Come on.
Forward hit. Hit. Shields.
God damn it, get you. Sorry, I don't want to circle strafe you, man. That's not what the ship is really good at, especially with fixed weapon loadout. So let's just gain some distance, make another attack run. Should be almost down. Come on.
Target.
Alright. Okay. As I said, ship fun to fly, interesting ideas. Not really worth the price, and of course you're gonna be heavily ammo dependent and all that. For the entire recording now we used like that armor counter seems to be off, because that one has 200 and other still has 2000. I don't entirely believe that. I would have said we should be we should be at like less than half of our ammo. I think this has 4,800 by default. Let me check my list real quick. Sorry for the low list. Yes, weapons, and Gatling has 5,000. So we used like 3/5 of our ammo, I think. So It's fine. You just have to go do some repair and rearm stops at Levski, which is fine. It's just right next there. It's just around, and currently it doesn't have issues with ships just staying around there indefinitely anymore. So it's much more viable as a port again. So it's fine. If you have a friend, it's real fun to use. But that's about it. I'm not sure yet what ship we're gonna be looking at next. There's a few interesting ships coming up at the anniversary week that I might be taking a look at, but I don't know for sure. I guess we'll just see it. Maybe we'll do a racing ship. haven't done one of those in ages, but we'll see that next time. Have a good one.